Hey y'all, this is Justin from Afrouae. Wanted to introduce episode number 3, parts 1 and 2. We were recently in Union Theological Seminary in New York City. I was invited to be a panelist in a class called Prophetic Pastoral Theology in the City, taught by Dr. Samuel Cruz and assisted by Felipe Luciano. We talked about a wide range of things having to do with prophetic leadership. Hope you enjoy it.
The next guy after him is this brother over here, Jonathan Soto, who I met in a church on the Lower East Side, and we were talking about stuff, and he was going and I think I'm bad. I think I'm all that. You know, Justin, I think I'm all that militant. He was going like this to me. Wow! And I had to actually stop and listen to what he was saying. Dr. Jonathan Soto.
Thank you very much, and thank you for that interesting framing of my militancy. Okay, I'll stand up. First, I just want to thank you very much for the opportunity to be here. My parents have tried to get me into seminary for a very long time, and I decided to not do that. I decided to go to law school and work in activism, and for the first time working in government. But I think that we are in a very interesting time. I think that when we see what's happening with the rise of nationalism and fascism throughout the world, there is a breaking apart that's happening, and we need to have a certain analysis. And at least from the government side, there was someone, and I don't know who said this, but they said that the 19th century was a century of empire, the 20th of nation states, and the 21st century is going to be of city-states, meaning that we're seeing a localizing and hopefully a decentralizing of power that can serve as a counter to, I would say, neoliberalism, colonialism. In fact, I apologize for the fogginess of mine, but I have over 200 family members right now in Puerto Rico. Haven't heard from them, have no idea what's going on. And when you hear about the 6 to 7 or 8 months that we may not have power, that is strategic. Someone said that there's a plan. It's always been the plan with Puerto Rico. El padre de la patria, Ramón Emeterio Betances, the person that was able to internalize the principles of the French Revolution and tried to start this dialogue between Haiti, at that time Hispaniola, and at that time all these different countries to create a confederation of Caribbean states. Unfortunately, there was this, I would say, timidity that we often see when we're confronted with freedom. Sometimes we don't want to take it. I grew up in a Pentecostal, rajatabla, fascistic, authoritarian. My pastor was literally a militant. He served in the army in the United States, and I grew up in a cult. And there was a verse that always animated my experience, and it was in Ecclesiastes 3:31. You know, God has made everything, and they hated everybody. So you could be black, brown, white, gay, straight, identical, they hated everyone. And I would say, wow, this Jesus dude is pretty angry, pretty upset at everyone. And I come to church just to hear about hate. But Ecclesiastes 3:31, God has made everything, or the Creator has made everything beautiful in its time, set eternity upon the hearts of all people without people knowing the work of the Creator from beginning to end. And it's the coda of that verse, the uncertainty, the dialectic between the known and the unknown that always fascinated me. And even though I didn't go to seminary, Kierkegaard was one of my really animating theologians, and he said that anxiety is the dizziness of freedom. It's our inability to know when to act, and what I've seen, especially with folks that have accepted the premise that we are either too small or cannot stand up to the United States or cannot stand up to capitalism, and we tend to diminish ourselves. And I see the impacts that my people are going through right now. Excited, I'm looking, trying to see if I hear from my family, and there's these 4 U.S. helicopters descending, and people are excited, and I'm like, y'all shouldn't be that happy. You know, there is not, this is not going to end well for you. What we're going to see is that if for whatever reason Trump decides to provide aid, that's going to be aid that the vulture funds and the hedge funds are going to reincorporate for themselves, since Puerto Rico is $80 billion in debt, and just perpetuate this cycle of neocolonialism in our space. So I have tried to work in a different type of analysis. And I never thought I was going to end up in government because, as you know, James Baldwin said, fire next time, religion is the sanctification of power. And by extension, you know, we see culture, politics, and religion serving as an outgrowth underneath all those elements. And how do we then operate? And I've been called chaplain of the empire, I've been called many things, and I think that my role in institutions is introduced, and your role in this institution, right? Because this institution has been criticized as well. So we are always complicit to any degree in the spaces that we operate in. And I believe that we need to introduce a sense of vulnerability wherever we go. The same way we need to own our spaces, as you mentioned, and not maybe think about how we're going to eat the entire elephant but take little bites. I view my role as introducing vulnerability points in systems, because I think that vulnerability is the language of love, and we need to start understanding and operating in that sense as we confront these systems of empire that are trying to destroy us and kill us. So I don't want to speak, I just want to listen. I'm very tired, and I needed to be around people that could distract me, first of all, from me not knowing what's happening to my family members in Puerto Rico, but really just absorb and be in this space. Dr. Cruz, a legend, a hero, and with Felipe, just a freedom fighter. And I just want to sit, absorb, listen, fellowship, and hopefully there's some residual spirit that you have all that could just provide some balm during this time. And just want to empathize with my sister in Mexico as well. It's interesting, right? Up until this point, the worst hurricane in Puerto Rico was San Felipe, I believe, or San Ciracao. But at that time, how many people were in Puerto Rico? Not 3.5 million.
No.
So this has been the most disastrous, and we have no idea what's going to happen. And yeah, I'm just very concerned, but we need a liberationist framework, and I'm here with some of the best in the business, so I just want to thank you all, and thank you for allowing me to share this space with you.
Thank you, Baba.
I'm gonna open it up for questions. Folks,
Curious, your thoughts, because doing a lot of research into the Black Arts movement, your thoughts on the connection between this culture piece and kind of movements for liberation or disrupting normative systems.
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing that really I've had my eyes open to is the fact that racism has never been done for racism's sake. There's always an additional agenda. Often, I mean, capitalism doesn't exist without racism in a US context, right? And so when you are considering the fact that, you know, in the United States, capitalism and racism are so intertwined that at a systemic level, it's really hard to think, how do you dismantle racism without dismantling capitalism, right? And that's just, to me, that's so weighty, right? Because you say that to, I say that in this room, you say that to a lot of people, intelligent people, and they're like, you're crazy, are you a socialist? I'm like, that's not entirely the point, but right, like to understand how entrenched this is, right? That we can't just dismiss people for being racist. We have to, you know, dig a little deeper if we're thinking really largely about solutions.
That's right.
So I will say, when I'm thinking about liberation movements, if you just think about some of the ones that have gained traction, they're ones that have very simple, clear messages. Black Lives Matter is a clear, simple, strong message. Occupy Wall Street, everyone's like, that's great. But the 99 and the 1%, everyone knows what that means, right? And although those didn't necessarily come with a lot of change, they did, I think it's very interesting that Black Lives Matter emerged while Obama was president, right? That there is momentum there. There is energy there. There is organizing there to work off of. And if anything, when I think of the Black arts movement, and I think of kind of what these young people are doing, is they are understanding that if you create spaces for the arts in your community, it brings the community together and it helps harness and develop that clear message that then can start to get people to look at these to understand these systems, and then I think it's really about community building.
Other questions?
I also think the Black arts movement is an incredibly important example of Blacks and Latino coalitions, right? That's vital. I've been doing research. Working on this new project about Black and Latino coalition building in the Trump era. And I'm doing research, and it's all these books, and the titles infuriate me. The titles just drive me crazy. Neither friends nor enemies. More than just neighbors. And I don't know. It's a lot of these are set up to be let's have the expectation be that the relationships are
animosity,
negative, right? And if anything, I would say Trump's election is an example of a Black-Brown coalition, because Black and Brown people in some ways came together to not vote for him. Mm-hmm. You know, it's 69% Latino, 97%, right? Mm-hmm. That's a coalition waiting to be built upon.
I have a question. I don't currently have any children, but I've seen, I have family members that are educators, and I've seen the rise of charter schools. And you spoke about the issues in the Bronx. I mean, I just moved to New York, so I'm not really that familiar with those. But throughout the nation, we see the rise of charter schools. And what are some of the solutions to kind of save, I guess, Black and brown children? Should we homeschool? Should we, I don't know what the options are. Should we fight for public schools? Should we participate in the charter school system? I don't question.
Okay, one, at the heart of everything is respecting the parents and respecting what schools can do and should be doing for the kids. Now, charters had originally been thought of as a place to do experimentation, to get best practices. They were backed by unions and encouraged by teaching colleges, so that, okay, we can have this experimental way of how do we grade, how do we do this? Let's do portfolios, let's grade them this way, let's do, project-based learning. And what ended up happening is someone said, hey, let's make some money off of this. So the original idea of thinking of outside of the box so that you can get better results for everyone was what a charter was supposed to be. It was supposed to be, dig into the history of what a charter is. It was supposed to be a laboratory, learning laboratory, where you can have people who agree to put their children in this place, and you would have learning teachers in training, you would have guidance from professors. You would be able to say, hey, how about we try teaching with manipulatives, math? How about we try this? All these different things that have been new methods have come because someone gave the freedom for that teacher to have autonomy and be able to experiment. But when you when you allow public schooling to live under the testocracy that it currently is, which is a product of capitalism, you tie the hands of teachers in regular schools. And if you want brilliant, innovative people to feel like they want to stay a teacher, you can't tie their hands. And that's one of the reasons why you have, I'm going to be wrong here, but just give me a breath for me to be wrong here. You have some automaton drone teachers who don't look at the children as a person, who don't want to teach the whole child, who literally don't mind downloading their lesson from Engage New York, handing them a handout, and forcing the kids to do question number one, question number two. That type of dry and very disrespectful instruction is why people ran from the public schools. We need to take responsibility for having created that situation. There were parents who were desperate for somebody who listened to them, so they said, look at this charter school. They put them in uniforms. They keep them organized. They make sure the behavior is, they don't play. I want that for my kid. And then there were many parents whose kids just were ignored, and they were bullied, and they were harassed. And they were desperate to get their kids out of that local public school because it was a hot mess. And so they went to the charter school. They didn't care if the charter school kicked kids out. They didn't care if the charter school did test prep till kids peed their pants. Look up Success Academy. They didn't care if the other kids got kicked out, if they had special needs or were English language learners, as long as their kid was okay. So the main kernel of the problem is that we had ignored parents to a detriment in the public schools. Pushed them out, didn't encourage them, didn't really integrate. So they looked for somebody who was listening to them. And the charters came up with this idea that they would listen to the customer. And they created schools into businesses. They started to push this business mentality, and the language changed. And then they wanted to teach these kids all these tricks like they were dogs. And, snap when you do this, clap when you do this, and fun for the kids to go along with it. Then you start realizing, hold on, wait a minute. Start digging a little further. What does Teach Like a Champion actually teach the kids to do? What type of psychological imprinting are you doing to these children? Why are you only doing this to black and brown children in the inner city? Go to fucking Scarsdale and snap in the face of this white kid. You won't do it. But you would do that to this kid Jamal. So make sure that he gets up. Pay attention. And I've seen these videos of how these charters will train children like monkeys. So parents don't see that. They see that it's calm and it's orderly. And that's what they want. They want to feel trust. And because they didn't have trust in the public schools, something that looked nice, was pretty, had a glossy thing. Everybody got color-coded t-shirts. They found the money from hedge funders and capitalists to bus us all into Albany. So, and we protest, we want our freedom of choice. What people don't realize is that it siphons money from the public system, creating a bigger deficit for the local public schools. And it also reinforces class segregation, race segregation, academic segregation, which worsens the situation for the parents who do choose public schools. And then what got worse is that they realized, hold up, wait a minute, there's not enough space in New York City. So now we want the space that you have. So even though education activists like Lainey Hamilton and other people have been pushing for class size mattering, and we won, how many times Robert Jackson won? We've won the money owed to us, won the class size that was supposed to be. And they have ignored all of those things so that they can say literally, oh, this school is underutilized, and place a charter school in there that's just growing. That charter will grow like a parasite and take over more building space. So even though they may have like the first floor and you think, okay, they're contained there. No, they're gonna want that dance studio. And they'll find a way to fund it, so that means they wanna use it exclusively. They want that lab. They want the school garden. They will grow and grow and grow like a parasite till they take things over. And what has happened in my friend Mindy Rozier's school and other places is that they have taken classroom for the resource room, for the special ed kids, for the occupational therapy, for the physical therapy, and they will push you out. It is like the beginning of this country, I swear to God. I swear to God. There's a story where Native American and Anglo-American were walking side by side, and the Anglo-American remarks, oh, we're getting along so much better. And Native American tells him, let's sit on this log. And they sit on the log, and he tells him, this is him, Anglo American sitting there. He tells him, move over, move over. Oh, I can't fall. That's what you're doing to us. You're pushing us off the edge. You may think that we're getting along, but the more you push us to the side, there is no place to occupy. So that's what Charters are doing. They're literally becoming parasitic entities in the physical real estate taxpayer-funded buildings and taking up all this space. And because they have taken up this space and demand so much and are rude about it, they want their kids to enter through this entrance. They want this, they want that, they want the auditorium. I have friends who will tell you all of this. They create a real damage to the quality of education of those brown and black kids. Same brown and black kids in that same building, just happens to be part of the public host school. The idea that they use the word host tells you why it's a parasite. It's a parasite related. This is not a symbiotic thing. This is a parasite. They literally want to go till they take it over. They will put their lettering on the outside of a building. But Success Academy and then PS whatever is on the side. They want to brand everything. And if you dig in deeper and you find out really the profit-making concept, the lobbying issue, the support of testocracy, the purposeful racial manipulation, all these things that is happening, you start realizing this is from hell, and I rebuke it and stick it somewhere else because it shouldn't be here. The reality is, if the Campaign for Fiscal Equity won, pay us, pay these poor kids. If you owe one little small school that you call failing over $1 million, who's failing? If that school has been owed for over 10 years, over $1 million, no interest being, calculated. But the state owes the public schools from years ago of a lawsuit that was won. But they're giving that space to the charters. The charters are taking over. They will manipulate anything. They literally started in Puerto Rico trying to shut down a whole bunch of schools and simultaneously passing a paper saying, hey, by the way, we're going to sell those schools to charters to make them money. 167 schools are going to be closed. By the way, how many will reopen as charters? It's a game. It's a real estate game. And if people don't wake up to the fact that it's exactly that, and paying attention, where is it? Where is it? That's exactly what it is. That's exactly what it is. They are hiding behind the idea that they serve kids. And evil Moskowitz just did a book on herself. And I don't want to hear from her. I don't want to hear from how she's really a nice person. I bendito. They have got to go this where they'll kick kids out. I have 30 females, mothers, who have stories about Success Academy. And when I was in the Committee for Special Education and having to help translate and do IEPs, funny how Success Academy had this magical paper where the parent would sign off saying the therapist doesn't have to show up, the teacher doesn't have to show up, the special ed person doesn't have to show up, the parent doesn't, no one has to show up for this IEP meeting because the parent wrote it off. Why? They don't want to give people days off. So here we are creating an IEP, the special education plan, nobody from the school showed up. And I'll say that and I don't care, because it's really, really amazing. And they have a lot of power. And they've intimidated plenty of people. And they play a lot of games. Their success is my main idea, but everybody else flies on the coattails. So there's lots of independent charters, like South Bronx Community Charter and other places that are amazing. Woke and amazing. But they're one out of many. If you look at what happened with the shock doctrine of disaster capitalism, what happened in New Orleans, they just cleaned it off the map. They're going to do that in Puerto Rico. Watch.
Tell them what happened. Tell them what happened in New York, David.
Well,
Do you have to tell me? Some of my friends are protesting there. New York Student Union.
well, I'm not going to jump so much in that. I'm going to jump into, I think, getting to the context of what's at the core of the course here for me and how I can relate to it, even though I do work in education, but I'll get to how education came about for me. So when we're talking about prophetic calling, right? We're talking about prophetic calling in a contemporary world. My calling in 2015, the mayor of Newark, New Jersey, Raz J. Baraka, called me to his office for a meeting. And I thought I was going to talk about, he knew that I did creative programming to reach young people throughout our city. So through my nonprofit, Dreams for Youth, we bridge the gap between education, sports, inspiration, and education. I had gone and created basically motivational programming to inspire and encourage young people. And he called me in, and I thought he was calling me in to do a program, and he said, I'm actually calling you in because President Obama just got off the phone with the White House, and there's an initiative that the president is implementing called the My Brother's Keeper initiative. I don't know if you've heard of it or if you heard anything about it. But this is an initiative placed on Obama's heart in the last couple of years of his tenure in the White House. It wasn't at the forefront, it was at the latter part. And what he wanted to do was to ensure that black and brown boys of color throughout this country had opportunities to succeed despite the circumstances in which they were dealt with. This is around the climate and time where we were seeing that a number of African American men were being killed publicly by law enforcement. I can go through the names, but I'm sure you know who they are, right? And so he said, David, the points here are to improve the literacy of these young men, to ensure that they read at the third grade level, that everyone is on tier there, that they receive second chance opportunities if they have disciplinary issues. In addition, we want to kind of create a culture of success for them and those who kind of work with them. So he said, get to work. Now, the White House had not laid out a cohesive plan. And so when we look at, let's look from a biblical model. I'm a preacher, so I'm always going to look at the biblical model. We look at issues and why prophets are called forth, right? It's because something is going on that is wrong. There's oppression, there's issue with obedience, with the Creator. There's something that is out of order, that is calling for someone to be a voice at a time when there's a voiceless generation and there's a lack of hearing or a lack of, I would say, a leader coming into place. So isn't it interesting that the president names the initiative My Brother's Keeper? Where does that stem from?
Cain and Abel.
Okay. In the story of Cain and Abel, my brother's keeper, am I my brother's keeper, right? The question is raised, but the Bible, the scripture says that it was not so much Cain killing Abel, but it was that God had created man, and this is the first time that man has had bloodshed, as we know it from a biblical example. Blood has shed. So the Bible, the scripture says the blood cried out unto God. So the blood was crying out in a sense, right? All across our nation. Blood was crying out in the streets of, right here in Staten Island, blood was crying out down in Florida with Trayvon, blood was crying out with a number of different incidents. And so when I looked at this calling at first, initially, let me tell you, I was excited because, and this is the reality, so let's be real. If you all are getting prepped to be pastors and lead congregations, you know, sometimes the glitz and the glamour of things can get in the way of your calling. So we'll see the light, wow, I get an opportunity to finally get here, get there, get everywhere. But at the core of it, there's a problem. And someone's going to have to stand in the gap and put a solution to the problem. The city of Newark had a problem as it related to not only the care of our young black and Latino boys, but a plan to get them up out of their circumstance and situation. And I don't know about a lot of my folks here in education, but what I noticed is we were using well-known and influential individuals. If you say Obama, people come running. Think I'm playing? You don't think I'm playing with you? Do you think I'm playing?
I saw it.
Call his name right now and say you're doing something. Watch out right now. They'll come running. Phil Murphy is running for governor for the state of New Jersey. He's having a fundraiser soon. Obama will be there. No one has cared about Phil Murphy at all in New Jersey. But when he says he's doing a fundraiser and Obama's coming, the masses come running. So we had this spotlight, but we also had something that was in order. We had an attorney general who was African American. We had Arnie Duncan in the role of an educator and being the head of education for our nation, where all things were kind of on one accord. But let me tell you what was looming in the wings: capitalism.
It was there, front and center.
Capitalism with this initiative. So Felipe can speak to it because he was heading up media and he was heading up press for the city of Newark. And when I came into this role, we highlighted events and programs. So I don't know if and I was involved in New York for a while with the with Sean Dove and the advancement of Black male achievement for a long time here before this opportunity opened up in Newark. But what I noticed was that we would get excited about events, but we had no actionary plan to move the people into a place of success. Let's think about that. So if you have a congregation, you're going to be pastoring a church, you get asked to do something as it relates to social justice, right? You have families in your church who are suffering, who are only making mothers who have 3 kids, single mothers who are making no more than about $15,000, $20,000 a year. But Prudential is pouring millions of dollars into an initiative where individuals are sitting in high rises all throughout Broad Street in the Prudential building eating great lunches, but they never see the kids who are dealing with these issues. They never see a child who cannot get educational opportunities because they can't get online when all the homework is. But we wonder why the numbers are failing, but we just want to have a summit and bring everybody together and teach boys how to tie bow ties from Newton, you know what I mean? Like, what are we really...
Superficial.
But what are we doing? What are we doing with the calling, right? So, after about maybe 6 months of riding this wave, I realized that we were in trouble. And when I tried to tell somebody we're in trouble, folks.
Teach, brother.
But see, this is what happens when the prophet gets the calling. It has to come forth, and it's revealed to you that there's a problem. And now you have to come and say, hey guys, I'm loving all this. We're having a good time. We're flying everywhere. We're doing everything. But we have a problem. How are we going to solve the problem? Why don't you just be quiet? Keep the money.
Yes. Say it.
And so when you look at prophets, folks who had to come deliver messages in times when kings did not want to hear that, when the people were comfortable in their circumstance and situation, right? It becomes a challenge. And so what I noticed was that we didn't lack financial support because the money was there. Goldman Sachs had put up money. They had created what you talked about here. They started to, in the financial world, say, how do we monetize ourselves off of issues within the inner city? It's called a social impact bond. You might want to write that down in your little notes. A social impact bond, right? Goldman Sachs says, well, listen, we know that we have individuals who are capitalists who have a lot of money and they want to keep making money. And we see that there's issues in inner cities and in urban environments. How do we capitalize off of it? Well, we'll make something called a social impact bond, which is where you can put your money up initially, but you'll get a return on your investment for helping people.
Sounds great, doesn't it?
But he doesn't. But see, the thing about it is that I'm sorry.
No, Felipe, please.
David is saying half the story.
Yeah.
The story is that the powers that be in Newark saw him come into City Hall and begin to change the character of the youth there. They were walking through the hallways feeling like they owned this bad boy. And he had a guy next to him who was very quiet. You ever seen those sneaky Negroes? They just... I've seen it. We got coconuts like that, Puerto Ricans. They just sit by you and listen to and eat your shit up. But they're waiting for you to get caught.
Oh, man.
So they took this guy, and I noticed, because I was on the floor, I noticed they would take him inside the office, the powers that be, and when he came in, they would kind of exclude him, and they try to put him wait, make him wait, and this is his guy. He nurtured him. That's why it's important for us to realize character. Character is everything when you're in this battle. Character. Find out what a person's pedigree is.
So let's take it back to a biblical model then, right?
Yes.
Let's take it to let's look at Jeremiah. Jeremiah the prophet, right? Jeremiah comes forth. He has a message for the people. The people abandon him. As a result of his message, the king throws him into the dungeon. It is not another Israelite that comes forth to raise up anything to influence the king. It's a man by the name of Ebed-Melech. Ebed-Melech, when you look at the research, Ebed-Melech was not a Hebrew. Ebed-Melech was an African who came forth and spoke forth for him on behalf of him. And so what happens is this notion of African American and Latino and Caucasian, and it comes to show us that at a time, sometimes when we get thrown into a dungeon, it won't be who we think it will be that will get us delivered. Ebed-Melech goes to the king and says, you have to remove him. How do we remove him? He's in the dungeon, a cistern. Back in that day, if you will, you wouldn't just walk into a jail. They would lower you about 20, 30 feet into muck and mire and close the top, right? We heard of Daniel in the lion's what? Den. This was a den filled with muck and mire. So they would lower you in with ropes, and you would reside in the bottom looking up. You had no light, only that one source, and you sat in muck and mire. The way that he was removed, the king said, well, listen, you can go get him out. Ebed-Melech goes and he retrieves rags from throughout the town. He gets them and they put them on these ropes, and they lift Jeremiah up out of the muck and mire. The prophet who's called by God is in muck and mire, but removed from someone who is not even from the same national background. It turned from something that was supposed to be holy and right and in a vein of care for brother and sister. It turned into, how do we hide money so that what we're doing doesn't really service the need of those in need, but we're able to put something in a storehouse. So then what do you mean? What is a storehouse? The storehouse is this. In the Bronx, in 2016, there was an initiative that was started. Out of the My Brother's Keeper initiative, the My Brother's Keeper Alliance, the nonprofit, is formed. That alliance kicks off with $250 million.
To do what?
I'm sorry?
To do what?
Can you ask it again?
To do what?
Have we seen any shift or change
Have you heard of it?
within our communities as it relates to young males of color that you would say on a grand scale? And mind you, before any money was poured from any, and on all of these groups, Prudential, Discovery Channel, all these folks poured money in because of that name I mentioned to you, Obama. They put the money there. The money was put there, and it was shared to us by, at the time, Michael Smith, who was heading up the initiative. You know, if we deem it necessary per city, we'll allocate a certain amount of funds to you. Those funds were never realized. And so what has ended up happening is, and what happened to me, is I saw an issue as a young prophet, if you want to call me that in my calling in ministry, because God has blessed us to be a part of ministry where in the city of Newark, if you come into Newark, there's churches on every corner, but there aren't a lot of churches who are doing the service work. So we have 3 services, 7:30, 9:30, 11:30. We have 8,000 members. We have regularly 3,000 people coming in and out of our location on a Sunday. But then Wednesday we have service, right? We have Bible study, and I have Bible Academy, I teach young people. But then we have an adjacent Willing Heart Community Care Center that's open Monday through Saturday, that feeds the community, that clothes the community, that provides groceries for the community, right? So answering the call of the people. Now, when you look at My Brother's Keeper and you look at these models and you look at what's coming in place, the challenge is this. When you all get in your places, in your congregations to serve, and you see that there's an issue, how will you be able to handle the issue? Not get blinded by politics, not get blinded by capitalism, neoliberal, not get blinded, but still be able to answer to the call. Have trust in God. Because at the end of the day, let me tell you something. I know we don't like to talk about it in seminary. Princeton didn't like to talk about it. But I got to talk about what, before I came to seminary and graduated as a seminarian, I knew the Lord in my own way. That's what's going to hold you and sustain you. That's what I believe holds the calling that these individuals have. Remember we talked about this calling? What? So when you're moving and you're in these environments, how are you going to answer to it where you're still prophetic, but you're also intellectually sound coming out of a Union Theological Seminary, sitting under Professor Cruz and Felipe Luciano, having all these individuals, you pouring that in and saying, I'm going to use what's in my toolbox, not to get caught up by spotlight, but receive and move in my calling. And so I talk contemporarily about guys like a King and a Malcolm X, and there's even others that, we don't really focus on, but we look at them in the manner of, oh, I have a dream, isn't that cute? The ballot and the bullet, isn't that nice? Yeah, Malcolm X all day. But we don't understand that these were prophets who gave up so much. This calling you have is one where you're gonna have to make that decision. If MSNBC comes in here right now, bruh, are you gonna say I'm taking the emeralds around my chest off and I'm getting my show, this is why I did? Or if the people are out here calling you saying, hey, I need help. Yeah, but there's no cameras. There's no one around. Why should I help you?
So I've done male engagement work in a town with 8,000, a school district of 8,000 kids, right? For 5 years out of Uniondale. And I'm an atheist, by the way. Okay. Now, I was baptized Anglican Church of England, baptized. I went to convent school in London in the 70s, which means I was beaten by nuns.
Oh, Jesus.
But I learned a lot academically. I came here at 8, I tested into 6th grade, it kept me in 3rd grade. So I wilded out for the next 3 years until I got to middle school and got tired of getting beaten by my Jamaican father, okay? I had my confirmation and my communion, went to Sunday school every Sunday with my mother. Father never went, but he told me he was a believer, but he never came to church. And I did my confirmation, and then after that my mother said her role is done. In 8th grade I could go to church whenever I wanted. Sometimes I went after that, sometimes I didn't. Went to Penn State, sought out a religious instructor that I met with one-on-one for 2 years that I was in college because I was conflicted.
Wow.
And the last time I spoke to this brother, I said, thank you for your time, but I've come to the conclusion that you cannot help me anymore. And I have decided I cannot believe in this anymore. After deep reflection, I was trying not to be an atheist. So here I am today, years later, and I'm still here. So when we talk about what sustains me, I'm not sustained by a belief in supreme being. Because for me, if that were true, people with my complexion would have been free long ago. Now, if God is all powerful, then he cannot be all good. And if God is all good, he cannot be all powerful. And where's that line from? The movie Batman vs. Superman.
I thought you were going to say The Matrix again.
I was waiting on that one.
So Danielle, you had a question? I saw you.
Yeah, so in this class we talk about building prophetic communities, right? Because the prophetic individual leader model, it's not sustainable. It's not, because they take them all out.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So the two questions. So where you mentioned that you heard the prophetic voice from the undocumented tattoo, artists. So where do you hear the prophetic voices, and maybe it's God speaking to you, or maybe through people. And then how can we go about building these prophetic communities where it's not one person that has that burden, but we're teaching folks how to think and to carry it communally?
Yeah, I wanted to actually piggyback off you because I thought, right, there is the Mexican community in New York City that has been a part of my life for many years that I feel indebted to, I feel responsible for. When I write their stories, it's terrifying because I need to do it right. I'm presenting them. My work is not very popular in the academy. It's not helping me out career-wise. I don't give a shit because that's what sustains my work, is the need to I am lucky enough to have known some people that are willing to share their stories with me. And so my responsibility is to tell them in a responsible manner, to share them in a responsible manner, and to seek out other voices that are not being told, they're not being shared. And to fight as hard as I can to get it into all these spaces that don't, want to hear about it. And then as I move, right, I'm no longer in New York City, now I'm in Harvard, and this is a whole thing.
Yeah.
How do I, again,
Sustain yourself.
yeah.
Right.
And so I,
You do it by going back to this kind of stuff.
I come back to this stuff, but also I need to make my mark in Harvard too. I can't just like sit on that and be like, oh, well, I'm here now. I did that already.
You're the ambassador.
I can do that.
And folks like me
And I can
are gonna call you.
I can be, lazy. So what I'm doing now is I'm going to Harvard and I'm saying, hey, remember how you all spoke up about, DACA? Put your money out there. I'll organize shit. Give me your money. Department. And I'm going to partner with these organizations of high school black and brown kids, and I'm going to bring them to Harvard, and they're going to work with these great poets that I know, because this is one of my other communities that sustains me. And I'm going to bring these people to Harvard, and you say you care about these issues, and give us some visibility on your campus.
Listen, my fear is, right, and we have to remember, more often than not, these systems, these institutions, they change people. People don't change them. So one of my personal mentors has been Cornel West, right? Did he start here?
Yeah.
And then he left, and where did he go?
Well, he started here originally, then he went to Yale, Princeton,
Right. So
and he was
still, right?
recently here, now he's in Harvard.
Right. So but it seems to me that over the course of his life, he has become more activist and less professorial as a result of years of being in the academy and realizing the truth, right? Do I have to say the truth? Right? We don't change the academy changes you, or you must leave. Okay, and so I'm still teaching rather than being a principal, or rather than doing other things I could have done, because I realized I don't want to put my faith in trying to change these things on big levels, because capitalism works hard to stop that from happening. So we have to be subversive. I sustain myself by, I've started to get myself in these kind of circles. I have to talk to individuals and keep my focus on connecting, being changed by, and helping to change individuals. Because for me, I think it's the only realistic way that we can change the world at the end of the day, rather than us getting ourselves into these big grand spaces and getting a lot of accolades, a lot of attention. But in the grand scheme of our struggle as a people, when I say as a people, I'm talking about as a species. I'm talking about as Mexicans, as quote unquote black people, or rural whites. I'm talking about on a person-to-person level. I feel like we can change things more individually than we can systemically. But I'm still a public school teacher.
Right.
I'm changing 100 kids at a time.
Right. So for me, I know that I can't change Harvard or a Harvard.
Okay.
But I can get a bunch of people, I can get some money for them, and I can get a bunch of people who now have Harvard on their CV. And that will change their lives and their opportunities.
There's a charter schools you end up with charter students who are automatons. And you're right, with bow ties. When I speak to them, they're yes sir, no, and I love the respect and all of that. They're not thinking.
Right. I've been taught to do that.
They're being told what to think, not how to think. And when you see them interacting with blood on the street, it's weird. Either they're going to the opposite extreme and motherfucking everything with their uniforms on, or they're like this. But by the same token, we have churches that are charter school churches. Ministers who have monetized their congregation or have gotten to the point where they are afraid to speak truth to power because they may lose their free lunch program. They may lose their trips and access to the mayor. They may lose stuff, so they'd rather just go through the paces. I've seen it happen. It happens all the time. Prophets cannot afford
To make profits.
to make profit, but more than that, by the way, it's not money, it's the love of it. What I'm concerned with is that you be with folks who celebrate you and celebrate your uniqueness. Because if you hang with dream killers, they will rob the very juice you have.
Yep.
And there are people in the church who are demonic. They will do their best, he goes through this, who they'll do their best to chop your legs off. You're speaking about Puerto Ricans in here, you're speaking about Latinos, how dare you? Chicago now has more Latinos than black people. Danielle, listen to this. I was there just a little while ago. Right away they come, well, you know, I said, don't even try it. You know Chicago has a big black middle class. No, but they don't say, that's the census, yo. What y'all better do start learning Spanish. What you better do understand who Mexicans are. And by the way, this goes for Puerto Ricans as well, who think their shit doesn't stink. Here's what we have.
Yes.
Folks, there is a force that is in the, and Charlene Sinclair talks about, did y'all read the 3rd chapter? 4? Huh?
This is 4, right?
No, this is, yeah, there's 4, I'm sorry, it's Revelation. Listen to this. For Gramsci, who's a social theorist, the repressive state in the narrow sense, police, regulatory agents, and various other judicial structures, exercises direct domination, whereas civil society, the church, trade unions, schools, media, cultural formula, and so on, provides a thread that unobtrusively weaves together the fabric of the dominant worldview and thus creates a benign, invisible adherence to dominant conceptions of the world.
Yeah.
They will tell you that common sense tells you you shouldn't be doing this. Common sense, they will say that doesn't make sense. But their sense of sense is just staying right there, staying put. And that's why prophets have to be respected and have to be listened to. It may not happen. Malcolm didn't know that there would be a day when people would be speaking truth to power. The Panthers lost 29 people for speaking truth to power. 29. Fred Hampton, now they got all that gang activity, Justin? And I told them to their face, you kill Fred Hampton, you pay the consequences. And I would add that those of us who are speaking truth to power must understand that we'll be like Jeremiah. Why did you put me in? I asked God, why did you put me in this? You told me you'd protect me. I'm getting my ass kicked constantly.
It's got the spirit on that.
No money, no nothing. Why did you do this?
Yeah.
And God told him, shut up. Are you different from anybody else? Who do you think you... But you told me that you knew me before I was born.
Yeah.
That you had the mission for me. He said, what did I just tell you?
Playing some problem.
What did I just tell you? Stop. And he had to take that stuff, and then he told them, y'all gonna get beaten. He said, listen to me.
They don't read the text though.
Work it. He said, work with these guys because they're coming, they're gonna hurt you.
There's going to be a period of time in which you still will have to maintain in that society, still continue to do what you do.
That's right.
Honor your tradition.
Honor your tradition.
And that gets back to her question on the prophetic community. I don't want to cut you, but I want to get to that second part. How then do we build or construct a prophetic community?
Very serious.
It's just what she's. So we don't. I didn't know until today. I didn't look at. And my best friend is an atheist. He's a Uruguayan. My other best friend is a Muslim. My other best friend. So my best friends, I didn't grow up, even though I love and I still witness to that atheist every day. Don't ever get it twisted. But I'm serious. That's me.
Jesus.
And I can still sit with my Uruguayan atheist brother who I grew up with, and I talk about my black Jesus, and he laughs, and we're brothers. I mean, but how do we do it? This is how I try to do it. We press it forward. So what does that mean? When I analyzed who really had the strongest hold on African Americans at one point, and I looked at it when I was doing my research in the role of director, My Brother's Keeper, I came to the realization that the man was Louis Farrakhan.
Well,
No one in society has brought together more African American men peacefully at one. So watch this. So I, as a young Baptist preacher, go to my senior pastor and I say, listen, why is it that we've been bringing in all these folks to talk about My Brother's Keeper and we ain't bringing in the main person who's been able to bring the major brothers together without... So look what happened. So they go, all right, DJ, fine, go ahead, chill out, shut your ass up.
Yeah.
You're always trying to bring people together.
Yeah.
Always trying to interface things. And how do we, I said, but I'm just saying, I mean, that's going to create issues for our who? Funders.
Right.
Because our funders don't believe in that anti-Semitic dialogue. Well, listen, I'm just stating the obvious. I'm just curious. Why hasn't he been in any of these tables? I'd love to have him come here. Be quiet, DJ. You can't do that. He's like, I call him up. I said, would you mind coming to Newark and speaking? I've heard about you. I've heard about the work you've been doing. You know what? I'm going to come. For the first time at a Baptist church, Louis Farrakhan comes to Newark, right?
I was there.
Comes to my church. Not a seat. You couldn't move. It brought in my Muslim brothers and sisters. It brought us all in together in one place. Everybody thought it was going to be an issue, and that he delivered a message straight from the Word.
Right.
That's what folks. So this is the veil. Like, don't bring in me. Gonna be talking. No, he came and spoke the Word of God from the Bible.
Which he always does.
Which he always does. Which is why.
He's a better minister than 95%
But
of
watch
our
this.
guys.
Watch this, Professor Cruz. This is where it really gets. So I got my traditional trustees complaining. Gonna bring these Muslims up here, right? A week later, who joins the church? Muslims start joining our church.
Yes, right.
They weren't joining just because of what it is we were preaching and teaching. It was more the breakdown. No one had done the research. Majority of my members, their relatives are what?
Christians.
Muslims.
Yes. Right.
Muslims.
Yeah.
Shahid is over there while you in Metropolitan, Jerome. Al Tariq is right here while... I'm just being honest. Muslims started to join the church and they say, you know what, we've come to join out of solidarity because we're just tired of the walls. Prophetic community. I then bring in Judaism. I bring in... the rabbi comes over and speaks. The atheist can come speak because the church now has to transform into a prophetic voice where it's like, we're in community together, let's talk.
And by the way,
That's your prophetic community. And so, I don't want to cut you, but my point, I wanted to get to that because I think we're too conventional in our approach. And we can't sit like this and we can't talk.
Right.
And then we don't move, oh, are you atheist?
Too many silos.
Yeah.
And by the way,
dark corners,
We don't
secret
talk the same
closets.
way.
and
We don't look the
Farrakhan
same
is
way.
going to
Can't break
finish
bread,
Christianity in church.
Right.
So for me now, I'm looked at a little different. Prophetic community to me isn't just, okay, we up in here in church and here's the word and listen to what we have to say. It's more, are we listening? The prophet really never had a pulpit. That's us in this generation. The prophet was in them streets. Excuse my French. I know I went to Morehouse and NYU and Princeton and so, but up in them streets, up in them little areas where she is, oh, I see the artwork. Now at Harvard, she has a platform in the streets to let people know, hey, these individuals are not just out here running amok and taking from sight. They're contributing. Look at the voice they have. Look at them in a different light. Huh? That's your prophetic community, my sister. That's where I think we have to kind of shed ourselves of regularity and comfortability.
And that's another thing, like with my work, like it's, you know, it would be very easy to be like, oh, I'm just gonna go, you know, present this work at, you know, the Latino Studies Conference with people who are like, oh, that's so interesting, I haven't heard about that, but that is in their zone, right? Mm-hmm. Like if I can get people who are open but of different backgrounds, then that becomes much more powerful and much more interesting. And that's why, you know, for me, like Dr. Nason, who's my mentor, is like a real role model for how you bring people together of different backgrounds.
Yeah.
But still, it's food. But still, right, it's still there, you know, like-minded some things, but from very different backgrounds.
By the way,
How do we do that? And I agree with it, but without having it co-opted by white progressives and liberals.
Ooh, question.
Because what I'm thinking of is climate change and the DACA issue.
Okay.
And it's difficult to talk about because you could be misunderstood. So the liberal progressives who have an agenda, conscious or unconscious, because a lot of times they're not conscious,
Right.
will tear you apart if you're not in line with them.
Right.
So I see all these cities throughout the United States calling themselves sanctuary cities. And I've said this before here in class.
Oh, yeah.
And protection of DACA, you know, activists for DACA. So they're sanctuary to those who is easy to be sanctuary to because somebody else is probably going to get rid of them anyway. And I don't mean that in a derogatory way. But they're not a sanctuary to citizens that are black and Latinos who have to move out of the city.
Sanctuary city doesn't mean.
Just
So-
gentrification, you mean? Or
Yeah, gentrification and displacement.
Wow.
So they
That's
look
good,
like
Professor
heroes,
Cruz. That's good.
including de Blasio, and I don't
You
say
know
this
what's
because
sanctuary
Jonathan's
about
here. With all,
having the most militarized
I say this when
police
you're not
of
here.
any police.
So, and I would not
Feel
disrespect
sanctuary.
you in that manner, so it's not
Or look
about,
at our schools.
but,
Just saying,
With
people
cops.
feel safe.
so the thing is, and in California, sanctuary,
It's like cool to be a sanctuary city,
yeah,
sanctuary
and
campus,
it's the
right?
cool
All
thing,
the universities are now sanctuary campuses.
and we're not allowed
Wow.
To criticize.
to really talk about gentrification doesn't take the power that it should. Noemi Klein, I think is the name, wrote about climate change, and I guess she's become a millionaire off of the book.
It's true, I guess.
And she could probably build a house somewhere where climate change won't disturb her. But the truth is that people of color have experienced climate change 100 years ago.
Right.
We've been living under the catastrophes of climate change already. Pollution,
Right.
environmental racism,
Right.
and so now it becomes a white thing.
Right.
And in fact, we had some indigenous people here at Union. Noemi Klein is coming here in 3 weeks, I think, or something like that, 4 weeks. So that's the reality, you know, and everybody's all excited. And we had some indigenous spiritual leaders who said they really knocked the book because they said it's an over-exaggeration, and you have to be careful how you say this because I believe in climate change. But they say, we believe that the earth will restore itself. We believe that white people are in a hysteria about this stuff. Not that they're saying that we should pollute the world. They've been fighting against the destruction of the environment all along. That's part of their religious traditions. Just like in Yoruba tradition, Santeria, Lukumi, you know, Candomblé. So people have been doing that all along, but white liberals, and you have other people that are not white liberals, but they learned it from the white liberals, that are following these trends, and they decide what the agenda is. That's why Cornel West had problems, because he would not just accept that you can't criticize Obama because he was African American. In fact, I was on MSNBC once and I criticized Obama's immigration policies. When I got home, I had like 50 emails calling me a fucking Puerto Rican bastard, a motherfucker, and all this shit. You know, people, Michael Eric Dyson, who's a great intellectual, now he's criticizing because he wants to sell books too.
Yeah, but when
And
he was
Obama's no
in the
longer
house,
there.
everyone in the house, listen,
Yeah,
that's one
exactly.
of the reasons why I was removed from my
So,
It's real.
how do we, I guess I'm saying two things. It's not really a question, I'm just thinking out loud. One is I'm pessimistic, but optimistic at the same time. I'm pessimistic because the system is so entrenched, and I haven't been using the word capitalism much, but it's all I talk about in a sense, where I say it's the money that makes you sell out, ultimately, is the work. And it's a difficult thing not to deal with either. You know, we can't, we need to live. And it reminds me of the saying, the Puerto Rican nationalist Pedro Albizu Ocampo, who said, porque el Yankee sabe que el ser humano, por un bollo de pan, niega su madre y niega su patria. In English, because the Yankee knows that For a loaf of bread, human beings sell out their mother and their country. So that's the issue. And that's why we talk here about prophetic communities, because somebody has to keep us in check. And it's not easy in academic world. Even before you said it, when I was looking at what you write about, I said she has to justify herself to some extent in the tenure process, because we know that the academic world, they decide what they think is worth writing
What's
about.
right, they decide what's right.
You had
So,
Sankara from Africa over in Burkina Faso was killed by his best friend. Malcolm was killed by his escort, the guy who was next to him. Fred Hampton it's not only the outside, it's the inside you gotta be careful with.
Yes.
Because they will say, well, I think he became too left. That's the new thing. You are too radical. You are too communist. You are too whatever.
Same with Martin.
And they will say the same thing. And they will shoot you. Now here's the thing. When you ask about that, Professor, I say, and I was asking Melissa and Aisha, you want to know how you keep legacy? By building legacy. And when you go into a mosque, you go to any Nation of Islam mosque, and everybody's like this. You may get mad at the ritual and the linear stuff, but have you noticed homeboy goes by and he say, "Man, motherfucker," as soon as he gets it, Assalamu alaikum. He knows that there's going to be implementation of a certain kind of discipline. You ain't coming through there bullshitting. Meanwhile, they'll jump in front of David Patterson's church and say, and sell the number right, sell the dope right there. Implementation of discipline. You keep an organization going through ideology. What do we really believe?
Yeah.
Leadership, I call it ILO, thread in Spanish, I-L-O. Leadership and organization. If you keep, that you cannot have a thought and not have a leader. We talk about collective things and no silos. Let me tell you something. Occupy Wall Street tried that amorphous shit and it didn't work. Who is going to be the firebrand? Is it going to be Nebraska? And by the way, never think that appearance, you never know who's going to jump up and be the leader. Always happens. In the Young Lords we had a guy who was a dope fiend. Dope fiend. Used to shoot up before he came in and say, "Oh, Chairman, I got to do this." The baddest warrior we had. Who would have ever thought that it was Fred Hampton that'd be leading the Panthers? They had to kill him.
Brother,
Yeah.
do you think Occupy Wall Street didn't work because they were doing amorphous shit, or because they were a segregated ultimate?
Because there was egos,
No.
though. There was egos of the back.
No. Here's what happened, Mom. In their attempt to get away from the old modalities, they decided not to have hierarchical leadership. In doing that, they didn't understand that people were not with them. You got to bring people with you to that. They imposed that on people, and people were at a loss. If we don't have a leader, what do we do?
That's right.
What do we do?
That's right.
And so what happened is, not when you don't have a leader also who can impose a sense of ideology, you lose perspective, and when you lose perspective, a vacuum develops, and the vacuum is where the CIA and the FBI and the police
Got you.
run in.
But if they were trying to be integrated, if they were trying to make sure that they had numerous voices in the movement, I feel they would have stood a much better chance of having a sustained movement.
If there was a real coalition.
Yes. And
Well-
that, to me, was their downfall.
That was their downfall. I agree with you. And by the way, it was the downfall of Fred Hampton. Fred Hampton and the Panther Party, and people talk about movement and they never talk about the Black Panthers. If you notice that, nobody really focuses. These were young men like yourselves, young men and women, who said, "Power to the people." We had never heard that shit before.
Yes, sir.
Power, black power to black people, white power to white people, brown. What? Hoover sent out a missive, and he said, "We don't need a black messiah," Fred Hampton. And breakfast programs issued from God, breakfast programs are the worst revolutionary weapon they have. Destroy the breakfast program. And that's exactly what they tried to do, because the breakfast was so effective that even middle-class black folk were saying, "Well, you know, they militant and they carry guns and shit, but they feeding Jason."
Yeah, Felipe.
Where do you think we got that stuff from? We got it from them. Ideology, leadership. You need leaders. I'm sorry, folks. We're not at the point where we can do all of us together. Kumbaya. It don't work. You need people who are down. Not everybody's going to put skin in this game.
This is true. This is very true.
They're going to talk about it, but they're not going to do it.
But you still confine diverse voices.
Yes, you can.
It doesn't only mean complexion.
No. That's why I was talking about. That's why I was talking about Nebraska. Who knows if Nebraska is not going to lead a Christian movement that'll take us to another? You don't know.
His name is Adam.
I'd like to call him Nebraska. Nebraska Smith.
And it's not Smith.
There's a cowboy. There's a cowboy that I like named Nebraska Smith. All right. And second is organization. Again, I would suggest that those of you who are Christian Pentecostal go to a mosque on Juma on Fridays. They do not play. Culture leads to politics, leads to theology. I don't know why people think theology.
If we talk though about capitalism, right? And I mean, it's interesting because I realized that I haven't used the word capitalism in a long time. And I'm sort of, even though it's not in style anymore, I'm kind of like, well, I am a neo-Marxist. And I studied Marx. But we have to talk about structures, which is something you were dealing with to some extent, Dr. Castillo, in terms of how you have to negotiate being an academic. And we all do. So I think, I just want to say this because this is, of course, not necessarily for people who want to be pastors, because Union is a very diverse in terms of students.
Very good.
There's a faith involved, but there are atheists here too. I guess like in Princeton, you studied at Princeton, it's not a traditional, but Union is even more diverse.
Yeah, more diverse.
But if people that are struggling with some type of independent way of doing things, and Paulo Freire, the Brazilian pedagogo, said, referring to the church, but he wrote, as you all know, about a lot of things. But he said, you can't save people in the church and expect them to stay saved outside of the church. And what he was basically saying, you can't ask people, I'm going to use a simple example. This is not what he used, but he said, you can't expect people not to lie, or say you're not supposed to lie. Because that might only happen in the church, because once you leave the walls of the church, and you need to get an apartment, and you make $16,798, so you're $8 over the limit of being considered, I'm just making up that number, eligible, I'm going to tell you to lie. And if you don't lie, you're dumb. I mean, I hate to say it, because you need to find an apartment. So you can't send people to be saved in a world that structurally doesn't allow people to live in that way.
That's right.
So I bring this up because I've always, if I have a little faith, is in faith communities that are independent from political and governmental organizations and agencies. Because once you are receiving money, and even a salary, and I'm including myself, let's face it, there's so much I could critique Union. They'll let me critique till a certain extent, because all institutions know where you have to stop.
Yeah, that's across.
And we all know when we can't cross the line. So our prophetic mouths shut up. You know, they get. So when I speak from Trinity, the church I serve, I'm much more free. Although I'm pretty free here too, because I have Trinity.
Yeah,
So some people don't have a backup plan. So it's not that I'm tougher or braver, I have a backup plan, you know, that'll help me pay my mortgage. So, but if there's anything, it's almost like we need independent institutions that are not receiving, once you're receiving money, you're not independent anymore.
That's right.
And in fact, to survive sometimes, I was hearing you speak about those charter schools. And I have a friend who's gonna come here and speak also, who I respect a lot, LPAC, who has 2 charter schools in his organization, and he feels guilty about it sometimes. I think he does, I'm not sure. But he's always justifying how good the work they do. And it's because he knows that at the same time that it does good works, it's screwing up the school system around him. But he also knows that those 2 schools bring enough rent to support his ministry. So what happens is that you're between a rock and a hard place, in that you have to accept the money that is damaging the community that you so-called, your nonprofit organization is supposed to be defending.
Yes, sir.
So there's structural issues here. When we talk about capitalism, we have to deal with, basically, that's the root of the problem, that everybody's bought out to some extent. And so I feel that maybe the only little hope we have is independent institutions, which is difficult to have. But synagogues, mosques, and sometimes churches, lately it's hard to do because it's hard to maintain those places unless you have thousands of people, and even with that you need more help. So where people are saying this is a prophetic community, we're giving our own pockets into this, speak what you have to speak, say what you have to do. Because, for example, there's a great, in fact, in Brooklyn, and I love her, but I'll mention her name because I acknowledge that we're all, to some extent have to shut up on occasion. One of the ladies, one of the people who does some of the best work in terms of environmental issues, especially environmental racism, is Elizabeth Jean-Pierre. And she's very knowledgeable. And she doesn't mess around. But in Sunset Park, there's really difficult stuff happening. And because her agency is funded by some people, she's able to talk about it in roundabout ways, not directly. So it becomes less effective when you can't go to the target, when you can't really speak up fully. And a big part of that is that we're all, to some extent, incarcerated because of capitalism by the people who control the funds. There's an organization here in New York City, I've mentioned it before, the Micah Table, it's a religious, interfaith religious group. But in fact, when I spoke to them like 6 months ago, I told them how I felt. Not that I'm self-righteous thinking I'm better, but I say you're too connected to the mayor. You can't be an independent religious faith voice if you are all supporting the mayor. There's nothing wrong if you support him individually without saying it, but when you are already invested in that system, it's hard to speak up really against gentrification.
So I would say outside of some of the types of institutions that you're talking about, that's why I find like some of the people that I write about very compelling, because what they're basically doing is a modern day version of mutual aid societies. And there is a really strong history of that we've kind of forgotten, lost touch with. That was, a big part of sustaining the African American community. And I mean, it's a cooperative business, and they meet and they vote on things, and then they expand their business. But they're also still all independent contractors, right? They own their chair, their tattoo equipment. And so they're all their own bosses, but then they all have a responsibility to pay however much into the rent. And how they want to go about doing that, that's up to them.
Well, it's an interesting point on word cooperatives. And to your point, the language you just used around even having to pay my mortgage. We don't own our labor. We've never owned our labor. In fact, if you look at the founding documents of our country, American capitalism is such a unique phenomenon because it aspires to these ethereal goals, and we see that the land on which this was built, if you look at the Declaration of Independence, it dehumanizes the owners of this land by labeling them what? Savages. And that justified the edifice on which American capitalism was born,
Okay, so
and then
European,
We'll come in and fix the indigenous,
Well-
and do better, and
we'll write something on paper to justify our black legend or, you know.
and what you need in order to acquire capital is what? Land or property, and you need labor. And we see the labor of folks devalued to a 3/5 degree in the Constitution.
yeah.
And we've seen this intersecting of theft of labor and theft of land to the degree that we have to operate within these institutions and find our inability to exercise freedom, to exercise agency, because we bought into the fiction that our labor is not sufficient or not enough. And so we accept a weekly check as a way of kind of extracting interest and saying, hey, at least I'm getting paid, when in reality, they've tricked you from 200, 300 years ago, making you believe that your labor and your value is actually derived from American capitalism excesses, when in reality, American capitalism is based on your usurpation of your land and your labor.
Oh.
That's it.
So
So
making us believe that capitalism and democracy can coexist. They cannot.
they can't. So
That
Mondragon,
was the
Spain,
lie.
Mondragon, Spain, that has all these models of worker capitalism, that's kind of what we have to start thinking about. How can we leverage, find the openings in our legal code system and be able to create an LLC that allows for joint cooperative ownership and pool our capital so that we can start deconstructing that process. But it took 300 years to get to this point, but we're in late capitalism. And as a neo-Marxist, I think that is, as Dr. mentioned, and I think that is something we need to start thinking about. How can we take Marx's analysis and look at what Frantz Fanon talked about?
Oh, yes.
How we can start thinking
Thank you.
about the deconstructing of the Marxist analysis and include race to it. Because as Frantz Fanon said, racism preceded race. Race is a construction of the desire or the need to be able to label and dehumanize individuals that you needed their land and your labor from.
So
And that is what American capitalism is.
So when we're gonna pull our money, let's make sure we
How did Marcus Garvey gain popularity? How did Marcus Garvey build a multi-million-dollar organization in the middle of Harlem, in the middle of the most rabid anti-lynching campaign in this country? How did he do it? How did Frank Lucas control Harlem in the drug trade? How did he do it? How did Nicky Barnes control an entire section of Harlem to the point that he was put on the cover of the New York Times and said, "I'm gonna beat this too," which is why he got his ass kicked. He tried to be a little white, but he had it going on. It's not that we don't have the principles of financial acumen. It's that we're taught to myopicize it. We're taught to downgrade it. I'm telling you, I know guys who are worth 16, 17 million. The moment you tell them to invest in constructive shit, they back up. Well, that's a little too much, man. And their people are loyal, committed, fabulously militant, but they won't move to the next step. I call it the problem of microcosm. We think small. God says, if you just ask me, if all these gifts, you just think big. Pray big. I'm going to give it to you. We don't want to pray big.
Yeah. So we come to the end of the I have to say, and I say this honestly, there's a lot of panels here all the time at Union. There are a lot of panels here. And all 5 of you, I guess it's 5, is the best discussion I have heard in 10 years of being here. I'm not kidding. I'm totally surprised by it, not because I underestimated the group. I underestimated Felipe, actually, so I didn't know. I'm not exaggerating at all. I hope the students enjoyed it as much as I did. And it was because it was not only sincere, but it was a little more in-depth than the superficial stuff that sometimes progressives and liberals have. So I want to thank you very much for being here.